Hi, I'm Dr. Martin Rutherford, certified functional medicine practitioner, chiropractor.
Dr. Randall Gates, board certified chiropractic neurologist, also a chiropractor.
Okay, so today I think the title is Rebuttal of the British Medical Journal article on gluten. More specifically, the article is termed the long-term gluten consumption in adults without celiac disease and risk of coronary heart disease, a prospective cohort study. Now, this study has been summarized by the British Medical Journal on many news outlets, and it has been summarized in a way that is not consistent with what the summary of the study was in the first place. And its recommendations is to, as a doctor, not recommend gluten-free diets to people who do not have celiac. Now, we have done many presentations on gluten-free foods, non-celiac gluten sensitivity, gluten and dizziness and vertigo imbalance, gluten and peripheral neuropathy. And we are clinicians, and we do this every day. And we have, I think, better data, frankly, than a study that could be argued, not to be critical, because the article does not say to tell people not to eat gluten, okay? But not to be critical, but it's somewhat of a flawed study on top of the fact that it didn't say what the British Medical Journal translated it into saying. And we feel that a rebuttal is appropriate because there are now thousands, if not tens of thousands, if not hundreds of thousands of people out there across the world who have gone gluten-free and have seen various symptoms improve. Not only the ones that I just got done talking about, but even more. So we felt that it was appropriate and probably necessary for somebody to step up. If you will notice, we have, I don't know, I think we have close to 400 hours online now on all these various subjects. And if you review any of those presentations, you will notice that attached are peer-reviewed journal references. This is our research center right here, okay? And so Dr. Gates researches all of these articles so that when we talk to you based on what we see every day in clinical practice. The goal always to being get as consistently successful results as is humanly possible, given the data that's out there, and having the latest data that's out there up to the minute when we are speaking to you. So Dr. Gates, my point is going to be, understands how to read a research article and be able to interpret it. And so he is about to do that for you with this article, with no intention other than clarifying what is going on. Because there's a concern raised. People, to me, people, not just our patients, but people are out there, are gluten-free. Maybe they get the sidelong glance. Maybe they go to it's getting easier and easier at restaurants, at least here in Northern Nevada and Reno. I noticed my wife's from Europe the last time I went to Holland with her, that things were a lot easier, but still in the end, there's still that, there's still that whole group of, you're gluten-free and that's stupid and this, that, and everything. You're feeling better, you're fighting it, and now this comes out and says, don't take it because there's a risk it might give you coronary artery disease. That's not exactly what that says. And that might just be enough to shake you, to get you to stop eating the gluten, to start eating gluten, even though not eating it is making symptoms that you have resolve. So the study. And anything else that you'd like to add to that?
Yeah, absolutely. So the study is looking at like the nurses' health study. So they have this huge group of nurses that they've been evaluating for a variety of health problems. What are they doing in their lifestyle strategies that are either allowing them to be more healthy? Like, are those lifestyle strategies actually effective when they do this retrospective analysis, or are they not effective? And so in this research article, because of the widely popularized gluten-free diets, they really wanted to examine this link between gluten-free diets and coronary heart disease. Now, kind of getting right down to the data. they basically took these nurses and they divided them into 5 groups depending on how much gluten they were consuming. So the lowest group basically was the lowest consumption of gluten, but they were not on completely gluten-free diets, or let me say it this way, the researchers could not ensure that these individuals in this lowest 5th bracket were actually completely gluten-free. They just said they were the lowest gluten consumption group. And then they have 5 groups, and then the top group is the group that consumed the most amount of gluten. So they really like to compare these 2 groups to see, is there a definitive difference? Now I'm going to read here. This is from the British Medical Journal's article that we're citing. They stated, compared with participants in the lowest 5th of gluten intake who had a coronary heart disease incidence rate of 352 per 100,000 years. So you may want to pause there. 352 cardiac events per 100,000 person years. Those in the highest 5th, this group over here, had a rate of 277 events per 100,000 person years. So you can, my first impression is, wow, that just seems infinitesimal.
So that's 75 more events.
Right. So the group who's in the lowest gluten,
out of 100,000
group has 75 more cardiac events per 100,000 person years. And because of that, you've just been bombarded across all media outlets that being on a gluten-free diet is dangerous and can lead to heart disease.
The doctor
Hopefully
should
you
not
can see,
recommend
right,
gluten-free diets to patients who do not have celiac disease. That's what the radio was saying.
Exactly. Hopefully you can see some of the holes in that statement already based on the actual statistics, because these statistics were not really quoted in any mainstream media broadcast that I saw. So then it goes farther. So they were talking about weaknesses of the study. And they said, although we excluded participants who reported a diagnosis of celiac disease, we could not identify which people without celiac disease nonetheless maintained a very low gluten or gluten-free diet. So nevertheless, blah, blah, blah. And they go on to say that they really could not ensure that they were completely gluten-free, these people who are in this lowest 5th bracket. That's really important, because maybe a nurse was saying, I don't have celiac disease, but maybe later on they were found to have celiac disease, or it was never reported. And celiac disease throughout the literature has been discussed as a provocative factor for heart disease, and going on a gluten-free diet can seem to help with that. But when you're going to come out and make a definitive statement and they're glaring, I don't know, just glaring examples such as that are almost excluded or not talked about when you're bringing this to the public, I find that to be a little.
Yeah, when I said this was a flawed study, and I wasn't trying to be real critical, I mean, in reality, it's difficult to compensate for all of the factors that can affect virtually any human sickness and disease when you're doing a research study. This seems to me to go even a little bit beyond that.
Right, right. And really what they found, what they adjusted for, is they found that likely this effect, if there is one between these 75 person years per 75 cardiac events per 100,000 person years, was due to whole grain consumption. So whole grains are associated with more fiber. Whole grains are associated with decreasing cardiovascular incidences. And so one of the authors of the study I read in one of the mainstream media outlets, he said, well, we recommend people eat things like brown rice if you're going to be gluten-free. That's kind of what he said. He was much more mild and meek in his interpretation of the results. However, you're not getting that mild and meek interpretation. You're being told, oh, you need to go back to eating gluten unless you have celiac disease. So that is important as well. And I think the reason why so many people are going gluten-free is because they feel better when they're on a gluten-free diet, whether it's gastrointestinal symptoms, their brain fog is going away, their headaches are going away, maybe they have peripheral neuropathy and their numbness and tingling is improving in their feet, or their balance issues are improving, or you have a thyroid problem, or you have Meniere's disease. All these things through a variety of mechanisms are being traced back to gluten. And one of the world's foremost gastroenterologists, Dr. Fasano, he did a study showing that anybody who eats gluten, it causes permeation or opening of the intestinal barriers, and that can allow pieces of bacteria to filter in. That can be associated with diabetes, which affects a large percentage of our population, can also affect obesity, or being overweight, which is like 2/3 of the population. So we feel that this is it's a narrow interpretation of the data that most of you are receiving.
I think that the British Medical Journal recommendation is an incorrect interpretation of what they said.
I know what you mean. Well, and that stems from what's being said on their website versus the conclusion. And maybe it's going to change now because we're doing this video. But we read the conclusion before we did this broadcast. And we're seeing that the conclusion in this article had some differences from what was on the website per what we were seeing. So
and it was relatively accurate relative to what their research said. They didn't say that. And gluten-free, look, the gluten-free thing became, here's the problem. Gluten-free becomes well-known because we have talk show hosts, we have liberal talk show hosts, conservative talk show hosts, we have all kinds of celebrities going gluten-free and getting on. And we had the one gal, was it Jenny McCarthy, relative to the autistic spectrum kids, and people start trying it. Well, here's the thing. Gluten is like the tip of the iceberg. Okay, gluten can affect so many things. This isn't our personal experience. If you look at any of our presentations that are associated with gluten, the research is there. It can affect your thyroid, it can affect your cerebellum, it can affect brain function, it can cause brain fog. I mean, it can on and on and on. We've had people come in here who are having 27 seizures a day in bed and had a horrendous cerebellum and get off of gluten and go from 27 seizures to 4 seizures and not be able to walk because their legs were going like this and be able to walk like almost immediately. Now that sounds almost too crazy to be true. It was pretty amazing. We didn't expect that type of a response, but we've had that a couple of times in a couple of different things. That's called gluten sensitive ataxia. Okay. It's a big deal. And here's the bottom line. If you get off of gluten, somebody recommends you to get off of gluten, or if you're one of those patients that comes in here and talks to me and says, you know, I can't lose weight, but one time I got on this the Atkins diet. I got off all carbs and that's it. I just watch my carbs now. I go, well, you don't have to watch all carbs. Just watch your gluten, because it was getting off of the gluten that allowed certain things in your system to start working better, like your gut and your thyroid and things that allowed you to drop the weight. It is not a joke. So I would suggest that you look into it further. If you heard about this study and you heard those recommendations and it shook you at all because it came from such an authoritative group on high. Okay, but
sorry, I mean,
no, go.
Another thing that just hit me is that I didn't really see in the study why these nurses were restricting gluten. Why were they restricting gluten? Maybe they're restricting gluten because they have other health problems too, which doesn't seem to be accounted for in all of this research. So we see a lot of patients who have autoimmune diseases and they feel better being on a low gluten diet. Well, those with autoimmune diseases, lots of times the genes are turned on, and so they have a propensity for inflammatory responses throughout their body that can really affect things like heart disease or cholesterol deposition when there's increased inflammation. So that's also important too. And as Dr. Rutherford said, gluten is just the tip of the iceberg. We're not here to say that the gluten-free diet is the end-all be-all diet for all of you, but we say that that's a good place to start. And from there, you have to find the right diet for the right individual. And if there is one take home from the study, if you want to say the 75 cardiac events per 100,000 person years are significant, then it's to increase your fiber consumption. And you know what? A great way to increase your fiber consumption is eat more vegetables. Yeah, and fruits. So you don't just have to rely on gluten for your fiber.
We agree not to go to gluten-free products, by the way.
Yeah.
That's another whole presentation that we have.
Yeah. And they said that they could not account for gluten-free product consumption, though they yielded, most of those came on after 2012, which is when the study came out. So anyways, that's the data. If you don't want to believe us, look up the research article online, British Medical Journal, type that in along with gluten-free diets causing heart disease. You'll probably be able to find the article. We attached it to today's broadcast. You can find it on powerhealthtalk.com, the abstract, and from there you can see if you can access the full article. But the data's there. You just have to know how to interpret it and be careful what you're reading. So
that's it.
We'll see you next week.